cassettes, in those days cassettes. Right? One was this, one was the songs of Ram Prasad, and one was a very old recording called Ramakrishna, like Ramayana, Ramakrishna. Has anyone ever, any of our Bengalis? They're too young. It was like a jatra set to music with a whole stage play kind of thing with dialogue and songs. So these were the three things. So whenever I needed a break, I listened to these. So I heard, of course, Subha Lakshmi's recording many, many times. It was really just classic, classic, beautiful, good. So what I thought we would do is we'll start with Shankaracharya and go a little bit quickly through his life because we know most of it, and his philosophy. We'll get some more tonight, but really everything was stated in that half verse. Who wasn't here last night? Everyone was here? So our Brahma Satyam, the half of the shloka, covers almost the entirety of Shankaracharya's teachings. So then we'll spend the rest of the time on Ramanuja, and at the end, if there's some time, we'll go through a little bit of the Bhaja Govindam. Right? So this is the plan for this morning. The Ramanuja section, you'll forgive me if I refer to my notes and read things because I didn't know very much. Even now I don't know very much, but I found, as I mentioned, a very nice website that has some very good, hard, reliable information about him. Shankaracharya, he was born in a very small village, small town called Kaladi in Kerala. Has anyone been there? I went in 2005 with Swami Sarvadevanandaji. We went there. And Swami Ishtanandaji, whom I think most of you know, his brother was in charge at the time in Kerala. There was a small ashram, and I was actually a little shocked because in India, South India especially, there'll be huge temples everywhere. But just a very modest, small thing. Now they've redone it. I think there's even more. When I was there, very modest, small thing, which was Shankaracharya's birthplace. Probably the most single most influential figure in the whole history of Indian philosophy, Shankaracharya. So I was a little surprised, but it goes to show that bhakti is king. Or queen, we should say, and jnana takes a back seat. Yeah, I think
that's what Srini was saying yesterday.
Yeah,
that gentleman.
It's true, and we'll find out when we get to Ramanuja. The importance of Ramanuja is unknown. He's underappreciated because his influence was tremendous. Anyhow, we'll get to that. So, Shankaracharya was born to a very simple family, but they of course were a very high caste Brahmin family. And the parents had no children for a long time. This story will sound very similar to the story of the birth of Swami Vivekananda. In the case of Swamiji, there were two sons, or a son and two daughters born who didn't survive. And then two daughters were born. So that there was no son in the family. And she was a great devotee of Shiva. So she did all sorts of fasting and prayers and vigils and everything. And she had an aunt who lived, or maybe her husband's aunt, who lived in Benares. So she would also go, I guess every Monday probably, to the Vishweshwara temple to offer special offerings so that a son would be born in the family. And then Swamiji, of course, was born. And Swamiji's paternal grandfather, after the birth of Swamiji's father, so he had as soon as he had one son born, fulfilling the obligation as a householder, he renounced the world and became a wandering sadhu. When Swamiji was born, they thought that he looked like him and thought perhaps it was him reborn in their family again. His name was what? Durga
Durga.
Prasad or Durga Charan.
Durga Charan, I think.
Anyhow, they wanted to name him Swamiji that, but Swamiji's mother looked at him and said no, because she thought of Shiva. So they named him Vishweshwar, so they called him Bile. That was his nickname. Bireshwar was Bireshwar Shiva. And then later this Naran name came, so he became... Anyhow, so Shankaracharya's mother also prayed to Shiva that a son would be born. She went to the nearby temple in Trichur. And in some vision, Shiva appeared to her and said, you can have many sons or you can have one son who's a jewel of a son, who is brilliant, and but he won't live long. So this is the choice. So she chose to have the one brilliant son who would bring great light to the world and everything, but who wouldn't live long. Now, similar to the case of Swamiji, the case of Sri Ramakrishna, and all of it, we find this is very interesting. All of these souls that we consider to be great souls, avatars or whatever, Chaitanya Deva also, we find that father died young. And they were generally the last son. They would be the last one. Of course, in Swamiji's case, he was the eldest, but Shankaracharya's father died. So then the mother, she's a widow, and she only has one son, no other children, no one else to look after her. So the same dilemma that Swamiji had. Only even as a young boy, the Shankaracharya felt this intense vairagya. So he wanted to renounce everything. He was a brilliant student. At that young age, they saw he had a very brilliant intellect and tremendous memory, all of the things that we know about Shankaracharya. So but he also was tremendously devoted to his mother, and he saw the plight of his mother, just a widow. This is another thing. Actually, on Mother's Day, I spoke on the relationship between these sadhus and their mothers. Because they were all mama's boys. Yeah, Chaitanya Deva, he wouldn't leave until his mother was assured. He said, whenever you want to see me, you'll be able to see me in vision, and that I'll never go so far that you won't get news of me and everything. Because in his case, there were 10 children. 8 of them died, and the 9th, his brother, had earlier renounced the world. So the same thing, if he renounced the world, she would be a widow with no one to look after her. So the same situation there. So anyhow, he, at a young age, he wanted to become a sannyasi, and he wouldn't do it without his mother's permission. Right? So then there's a very famous story that he was taking bath. You can see the bathing ghat, right? Where he went. Yeah, it's all right there. They think the river moved, since his time and everything, but still, where he went in and he was attacked by a crocodile. And it looked for sure that he was going to die, that there was no chance of survival or anything. So there's something called apat sannyasa that you can take at the very end of your life, or if it looks like death is imminent, if a danger or something like that. So you'll die as sannyasi, you'll have at least that good karma or liberation, something like that. So he requested permission from his mother, who was watching the whole thing. So she thought, what can we do? My child won't survive, at least let him have that peace of mind that he died as a sannyasi. So as soon as she gave her permission, of course, the crocodile let go, and he was fine, and he came out and everything, but she had given her word, so she wouldn't go back on it, and he also was very happy. So again, he consoled his mother. He promised her that I'll come back and see you on your deathbed, and I'll perform your funeral rites. Now, this is the most orthodox of orthodox sannyasis. It's forbidden for a sannyasi to do shraddha for the parents, and still he promised his mother he would do it. Yeah. So we shouldn't draw too many conclusions, about Shankaracharya being hard-hearted and too strict and everything. So this is the promise that he made to his mother. So then he set off as a wandering sannyasi, and he met someone named Govindapada, who became his guru. He was well known, a great scholar and everything. And this Govindapada instructed him to expound these teachings of Vedanta, to write commentaries. A lot of the things that we take for granted, say this Prasthanatraya, something like that, we take for granted that these were all well-known things. Probably because Shankaracharya commented on these things, he gave them that value. In fact, the Gita was not very well known before his time. And his commentary made it so popular that there were some scholars, Western scholars mostly, that thought he wrote this Gita. They attributed it to him because we don't find any earlier commentaries on it. Although, when we read Shankara's commentary, we see he was arguing against an earlier position. So there was obviously an earlier commentary that we don't have now, but that he was aware of at the time. So anyhow, he, at least after his time, it was more or less incumbent on any acharya who wanted to start or solidify the sampradaya to write commentaries on these three pillars of Vedanta, the Upanishads, at least major Upanishads, or at least one of them, the Brahma Sutra, and Bhagavad Gita. So this was just one of the things that he did. He wrote all of these commentaries. All of the hymns to the gods and goddesses that we have. Now, there's a great deal of speculation and controversy. Did he actually write them or not? Because after him, all of the disciples who became heads of the mutt, they were all called Shankaracharyas. That way. So sometimes we see things that say Adi Shankaracharya, so specifically the original one. But to me, it doesn't matter because there's no inconsistency. And I mentioned yesterday, either here or downstairs, this distinction between Vada and Upadesha. That when it comes to the Upadesha here, that we see that Bhaja Govindam, it's Swamiji's Song of the Sannyasin, and so many of the illustrations that Thakur gives. And it's equally valid for a follower of any spiritual path, even for the extreme dualist. Because it's all about renunciation, and it's all about detachment, and all about transitory nature of the world. Right? So I don't see any inconsistency in claiming that Shankaracharya himself composed all of these other things, and some beautiful treatises. We know his Viveka Chudamani and other texts. That these are all beautiful treatises on this Advaita Vedanta. His commentary on Gita, if you read that, it seems a little bit too much fighting against this idea of karma, that whether you can perform rituals and do it. Well, this is because he was trying to counter or contradict or defeat this previous commentary. The previous doctrine, it was something called karma jnana samuchaya. That it's a combination. Bodhayana or something, they give a name, probably the one who wrote it, that he wanted to combine Vedic ritual with the path of knowledge. So that's why Shankaracharya argues so strongly against it in Gita. There are many nice, Ramanuja has a very nice commentary on Gita. Sridhara Swami also has a nice commentary. So, Shankaracharya, he traveled the length and breadth of India, went to all of the holy places. He trained up his disciples and sent them to the different mutts that he started. He started the Dashanami Sampradaya, which is 10 monastic orders, which get broken down into 4 different mutts, monasteries, in 4 corners of India. And he sent his disciples there to look after them. And we have to get 10 out of 4, right? So some have to have, a couple of them have to have 3 of the 10 sampradayas, and the other 2 will have 2. So 3 plus 3 is 6, 2 plus 2 is 4, 10. Like that. So, ours, because Totapuri was the guru of Sri Ramakrishna, we also are Puris. So my real name is Atmajyanananda Puri, not Stuart Maharaj. and we're connected to Sringeri Mutt. Yeah, Sringeri Mutt. And we'll go into this a little tonight with Mahavakyas, but each one of these mutts has its own Veda. So there are 4 Vedas, 4 mutts, so each one symbolically will be connected with that. And the Mahavakyas, there's a Mahavakya for each of the 4 Vedas, so each of the mutts will have its own Mahavakya. So he organized everything. He organized it more than it was ever organized before, except for the, of course, Buddhist monastic tradition, that way. And he really brought back the whole concept of temple worship in India, because this was a time, that big transitional period. Just as the Buddha came at a transitional period, this was also the transitional period between the Buddhist and the kind of Renaissance Hindu tradition there. So this was another thing that he did, and then of course he tried to defeat all of the other positions that were there, the Mimamsakas. Mimamsakas were the ritualists. The Mimamsaka means Purva Mimamsa. Uttara Mimamsa and Vedanta are the same. These are 2 different names for the same thing. And there were dualistic traditions at that time, Sankhya, followers of Sankhya, and of course the Buddhists. So he argued against all of them. We all know the story of Kumarila Bhatta. We talked about it a little bit at lunch. I won't go through the whole thing. But it was through this whole story that he ends up debating Mandara Mishra. And we have this practice that the one who lost the debate will become the disciple of the other or join that tradition. So he became one of the chief disciples of Shankaracharya, the Sureshwaracharya, and wrote some very well-known treatises himself. Now, in the midst of all of this activity, he didn't forget his pledge to his mother. So he went back, he saw her on her deathbed. Somehow he knew. So he got back just in time. And he himself built a funeral pyre and performed her final rites. There were objections on every side. Of course, sannyasins wouldn't like it. Even the family members didn't like it, because it was too much against the Orthodox tradition. But he had made that promise to his mother. And then he retired to the Himalayas and passed away at the age of 32. So that prediction came true, that he led a very short life that way, but accomplished a tremendous amount in that very short lifetime. If you go to Kedarnath, has anyone been there? Kedarnath. You'll see there's a hut that they say was his Mahasamadhi feet, that he passed away in Kedarnath. Kanchipuram, they'll say he passed away there.
Oh.
This is also a funny thing, that this is, Shankaracharya of Kanchipuram is probably one of the more famous ones and everything, but how this fits in, this will be the 5th. And so whether this is legitimate or not legitimate, I never quite understood. Anybody know anything about that? How they explain it, anyhow. Okay.
And Shankara Digvijaya, Tapasyananda's translation. They say it is possible there was another Abhinava Shankara 200 years after Adi Shankaracharya.
Who founded that?
Who founded that is also a possible theory.
Yeah, that makes sense. Of course, they're the one to claim it's original. Okay. All right.
I think the other 4 Pitas are Raja Pitas, Rajamats, and the Kanchi is the Gnana Pita.
Ah, okay. So they make that distinction, huh?
Yeah, because the other Swamijis like Sringeri, they have a crown. And
Ah, okay.
whereas the Gnana Pita, they don't.
Okay, good, thank you. Okay, now we will switch to Ramanuja. And we have how many from South India here? Raise your hand. Of those from South India, how many come from, it's from Shri Sampradaya tradition, Ramanuja tradition?
Yeah, Sri and Sri. Sri and Sri.
Hari, you were half up, half down.
Both. So on maternal side is Shaivas, and on maternal
Yes.
side is
Okay, now I'll tell you a secret. His real name is Hara.
yes.
So Hara Hari. So he's starting both sides. He's sitting on the fence. So if one side of the family comes, you turn and look that way, you're Hara. The other way, you look that way. Ah, very good. Okay, very good. So those who come from this tradition will have to help me, and if I say something wrong, you correct me. And my first question to them will be, is this a devotional tradition that gives some connection with the type of temple worship and everything? Or is there really some type of affiliation with the Vishishtadvaitavada of Ramanuja and some special devotion to Ramanuja as a spiritual figure? See, for Shankaracharya, he never wanted to have himself placed in any high position. You won't see temples with his figure in it or anything in worship. In fact, the place of temple worship for Shankaracharya is very interesting, because he wasn't a great proponent of the Bhakti Marga. Everything was oneness, so there's not that much room for devotion. And yet at the same time we have these hymns, and we have this worship of Shri Vidya. So you'll see these mandalas and things and places like that. Okay, Ramanuja. Now, Shankaracharya lived how many years? 32 years. How many years did Ramanuja live?
120.
120 years. Yeah.
There's a dispute about it.
Of course.
Now with the dates and everything, predicted his age is 80 years.
Even that was a long life at that time.
It's a long life, yeah.
That was a long life at that time. Okay. Now, so Ramanuja, he represents the philosophy of qualified non-dualism. Now, when he was born, the predominant philosophy was Advaita. So it is natural that when he was looking for a teacher, that he found an Advaitin, someone who followed that teaching. So his contribution was that not only did he give a different philosophical interpretation to the nature of the self, the nature of Brahman, and the nature of the world, but he did it in such a way that it created scope for devotion, for bhakti. And he was the first one to give a theistic interpretation to Brahman from a philosophical point of view. When we get to Gita, of course, we also have this theism is there, that there's the personal aspect of God. And it's there, of course, with the avatar and everything, but when we come to the really Upanishadic idea of Brahman, he does it in such a way that it'll be a type of Brahman that can have these loving qualities and everything, that we can form a devotional relationship with. So this was one of the great contributions that he made. He tried to show that the nature of the individual can also be the same as the nature of Brahman, without being identical. We share that nature, like the rays of the sun. The rays of the sun, that light, indistinguishable from the sun itself, but there'll be many of them and they'll all be separate. So we'll get a doctrine where these individual souls are many, they're separate from each other, but still this ego aspect to it. I mean, he can still say that this is changing and impermanent and everything. So it's a nice bridge between a very dualistic and materialistic type of philosophy and this highly idealistic Advaita Vedanta. Now, when we read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, probably the easiest way to understand this is the bell fruit example. And Sri Ramakrishna uses this example so much that M actually writes, you know, the English translation, we don't get the headings translated. And in the Bengali, every few paragraphs, or maybe one per page almost it seems, M will give a little heading. And M actually writes of Sri Ramakrishna that he followed the school of Vishishtadvaitavada. So M was of the opinion that was of the three philosophical schools, that was the one closest to Sri Ramakrishna's own personal philosophy. I'll give my take on that in a minute, but anyhow, the reason he says that is because of the example of the bell fruit. Now, Sri Ramakrishna says you take a bell fruit. Now, the only edible portion of that is the flesh. It has a hard outer shell, which you have to remove, and it has inner seeds inside that you remove. Then the flesh can be used to make the sherbet or make it into pulp, something like that. That's the edible portion. So he says that the pulp is like Brahman, and this hard outer shell is like this physical universe. It belongs to it, it's part of it. The seeds inside are all the individual souls. They also dwell within the same Brahman. So there's oneness. This is Vishishta Advaita, it's oneness. But with these distinctions, with the distinctions that it has parts to it. And Sri Ramakrishna says that you can discard the shell and discard the seeds if you want to get to the Brahman, to get to the core of it. But you won't get the full weight of the fruit unless you accept all of them. Yeah. Now, compare this to the Shanti mantra, Purnamada, Purnamidam. This, according to this, we can say that Brahman, the flesh of the fruit, the essential part, this is infinite, this is perfect, this is full and complete. And what we call this visible universe, that also represents a full and complete system in itself, Purna. But according to this, if you remove this second circle, infinite, from the infinity of Brahman, infinity alone remains. So according to that, if you subtract the hard outer skin and the seeds, the weight will be the same. Right? So if we think of the sun reflected in all the different containers of water, if we increase the number of containers of water, we won't have less sun. It's not that each time it's reflecting, we're taking a little bit away from it. It remains exactly what it is. So when we say that the weight increases when we add the individual souls in the universe, that's giving some reality to them. That they have some independent existence, but not separate from Brahman. So this is, and in fact, the living beings and the universe, Jiva and Jagat. These two things are considered the body. So we have this idea of Sharira and Shariri, that the embodied one, the body and the possessor of a body. So Brahman is the possessor. And these two things together represent the body of Brahman. So just as I'm a soul within a body, I have a physical body and I have a mind. These form the two main characteristics of me. The same way that Brahman has all the individual souls and this whole universe representing the body of Brahman. That way. Now, so these two things represent, we have two aspects. One is called Chit and the other is called Jada. The universe will be insentient and the Jiva will be sentient. So we have this Chit Jada Grantha, this kind of tying up together of these three. Now, the only way all of this works is if the consciousness of the jiva, has to be considered an attribute of Brahman. So, according to Ramanuja, Brahman is not pure consciousness itself, it is the possessor of consciousness. And each jiva also possesses consciousness. So, the sum total, Swamiji has probably his most famous statement when he says, "May I be born again and again and worship the only God I believe in, the sum total of all souls." This idea, sum total of all souls, this is a Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta idea. Not that Swamiji, of course, we're not going to pigeonhole him either into any of these, but he also liked that idea, that all of us form parts of that one whole. Each individual mind is part of the cosmic mind. This idea of microcosm and macrocosm works best with this Vishishta Dvaita Vedanta. So this is, anyhow, a little bit of the philosophy. But let's get back to his life. So from a young age, he also was seen to be very brilliant and very liberal with regard to caste. This was another thing that was found at a very young age. He was very friendly with someone by the name of Kanchi Porna. Right? You know these stories, huh? Who was considered, he was a Shudra, but considered to be a saint, very saintly person. He became very close with him and wanted him to be his guru. But this Kanchi Porna, he was mortified at the idea that some of the very high caste of Brahmin would take him as a guru, so that didn't happen. Now, shortly after being married, he was married as a teenager. This was common, of course, as child marriage in those days. His father passed away. So same thing. Huh? It seems like a coincidence, but this, even in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, this brings home very sharply the transitory nature of the world, the uncertain nature of the world. So Sri Ramakrishna, we wouldn't think he would need anything like that, of course, to turn his mind Godward, but even he was seen to become more introspective after his father passed away. And of course in Swamiji's life it was a tremendous blow to him. So after the father passed away, they moved to Kanchipura, which was close to where he was born, to his birthplace. And Ramanuja found his first guru, this Yadava Prakasha, who was an Advaitin. Now there's a famous story, which I didn't find in this account. I don't know why it's not here. This is the only story that I had ever heard about Ramanuja, that when he was given mantra, that he was told, don't tell this to anyone. He said, you repeat it yourself, you'll get liberation. And he said, what if I tell it to other people? He said, other people get it, they'll also get liberation, but you'll go to hell. So immediately he went and started, broadcasting it to everyone. Showing that compassion. He didn't mind going to hell himself if other people would be liberated that way. So anyhow, the beginning of tension between the two of them, because he was an Advaitin, and very quickly Ramanuja started developing, his other ideas of this qualified non-dualism. So a lot of the teachings that Ramanuja started giving were contrary to the teachings of his guru, and his guru was furious, and his other disciples were furious, and they hatched a plan to murder him. Yeah, and so somehow he got word of it, and he managed to escape, but he never told anybody anything about that. And then this Yadava Prakasha, he also passed away, so that was the end of all of that. So here, this Ramanuja, he had very bad luck with teachers. First he wanted this Shudra who wouldn't accept him. Then he gets a teacher who tries to kill him. Then he goes back, and there was already a Shri Vaishnava community. Now the Shri, if we look at all of the sampradayas in India, there are four main Vaishnava sampradayas, and then the Shankaracharya sampradaya. They have a parampara, which means it traces itself back from the student to the guru to his guru and all the way back. But all of them take it back to some divine figure. So the Madhva Brahma Sampradaya, and one is Saraswati Sampradaya. I don't know all of them. Shankaracharya goes back to Dattatreya and like that. So the Shri means that they trace it all the way back to Lakshmi. So there's some divine source, even though it may start with one particular great teacher. They'll always trace it back to some divine source like that. So this Shri Sampradaya was really not a very orthodox type of tradition, because it was based more on the Tamil poems. This, okay, don't laugh at me. Nalayira Divya Parabandham.
Nalayira Divya Prabandham.
Is that right? Nalayira. Okay, Divya Parabandham. There were 12 Tamil Vaishnava saints. These were the avatars. So it was more of a devotional type of tradition, not based so much on Upanishadic commentaries and things like that. So it was a popular tradition, an important tradition, but it didn't have that stamp of authority that comes from these commentaries on Upanishads and Brahma Sutra and all of that. So this was the work that was left for Ramanuja. So this was when he met Yamuna. So this is Yamunacharya. Yamunacharya, and he was an accomplished philosopher, but he hadn't done all of these things anyhow. So Ramanuja was very anxious to meet this Yamuna. He thought he'll get his guru there, and by the time he went to see him, the Yamuna died. So again, he lost that. I told you he had bad luck. He had bad luck with these gurus. Then this is interesting. After Ramanuja gained his composure, he made his way over to the crowd centered on Yamuna's corpse. He noted the 3 fingers of Yamuna's were curled. Don't know which 3. Yamuna's senior disciples explained to Ramanuja that they likely represented 3 wishes of Yamuna, one of which being that a commentary on the Brahma Sutra should be written. And then, of course, Ramanuja more or less accepted him, guru, and tried to fulfill those wishes. And it doesn't say what the others are. The crowd took it as a sign that Ramanuja was the heir apparent of Yamunacharya. So then this Mahapurna comes into the picture. He also, he was a senior disciple of Yamuna. He takes the role a little bit of Ramanuja's guru here, and he helped teach him all of these different things. Now, Ramanuja's wife. You know about his wife? Yes. Yeah. She picked a fight with Mahapurna's wife. And she was very orthodox and rigid. She didn't like this, first of all, that Shudra that she didn't like, and other people of low caste. Once when this Kanchi Purna came, and after eating, this Ramanuja was hoping that he would be able to eat the prasad left on his plate. And his wife cleaned it off as impure first. She wouldn't allow it, so he got annoyed at that. Then, again, there was something with caste things and everything, so he got annoyed. And he sent his wife back to her father's house, and then renounced. So then he became a sannyasi. It doesn't say exactly how old he was at this time, but he earned the title Yatiraja, King of Ascetics, which is what we call Swamiji now. Yeah, understand Yatiraja. He wrote 2 major works, There's Vedanta Sangraha and his Shri Bhashya, his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, and then also the Gita. Yeah, he wrote many other smaller things. Yeah, there's Gadya Traya. It says, but these are the most important things, the things that we know. Now, a little philosophy. The quarrels that take place among the different schools of Vedanta have to do with the nature of Brahman. Is there any scope for any gunas within Brahman, or only the nirguna Brahman is real? The jiva, is there any reality to the jiva? Are there many of them? Is there any separation? Is it only ignorance that keeps it from being one with the Brahman? And then, of course, this world. Is it a creation of Brahman? Is it a projection of Brahman? Is it an appearance of Brahman? Is it an illusion of the Brahman? All of these. So these are the points of quarrel that we have. Now, in the case of Advaita Vedanta, the consciousness of an individual is regarded as numerically identical. I like that phrase. Numerically identical with the consciousness of Brahman. Now, part of the theory is that in order for one thing to be part of another thing, that first thing has to be capable of division. If it's infinite, nothing can be subtracted from it. There are no parts to infinity. So it has to do with the nature of it. If we're, suppose we have several glasses filled with water, and we want to talk about, or jars filled with water, and we put it in the ocean. Okay, so there's water inside, there's water outside. Now, the amount of water that's in that jar will have to be subtracted from the amount of water that's in the ocean in order to keep the right amount of it. Right? If we move that jar, then the water that's inside the jar will move along with it. It's trapped in there. If we number the molecules there, it'll be the same ones that move across there. So if we think of consciousness in these terms, then we can say that each person is a wave on this ocean of consciousness, and that they're all separate. They belong to it, but they're all separate from it. Now, the Advaitins will say, well, that's all well and good, but consciousness is more like the nature of space, empty space. Now, if we have that same jar, only it's in a room, empty room, and we move it, has the space within the jar moved? The air molecules, we can say, oh, maybe the air molecules move, but space, pure space, not only doesn't it move, but we've reversed the whole process, that actually it's the jar moving within space. The jar exists within space. When we say space exists within the jar, we're taking our point of reference as this visible universe, and if we start out with the axiom that Brahman alone is real, we have to start with the Brahman. So if we take our point of reference as pure space, then everything's within space. Everything exists within this Brahman. We speak very often about Brahman pervading everything. This is a very odd concept that is very confusing, because it assumes that reality and takes its point of reference as this world and tries to say, well, Brahman is in each and everything. This idea of pervasion really, if we look at the examples that they give, it's not of one thing entering into another thing, but it's the same way that gold pervades all ornaments made of gold. It means it is it. There's nothing but gold, actually, with name and form added to it. So Ramanuja will take this point of view that there's some reality to each individual self, that this is chit, that it has its own separate existence, whereas Shankaracharya will say this is the infinite, transcendent, pure, empty the Brahman. It can't be divided, there can't be many. Consciousness is one of the very few nouns that doesn't have a plural. Right? We don't talk about consciousnesses. Right? Consciousness is one unitary. Now these are very, sound like very technical and unimportant points. But when it comes to what happens to the soul after death, then if there's individuality is real, then we remain as individuals. This becomes more of the important element to it. Then Ramanuja has this other theory that consciousness requires an object. And it's a very good point. It's a very good point. That can we conceive of consciousness that's not consciousness of something? So if that's true, that consciousness requires an object, then there has to be some reality to this universe and to individual beings. That they're codependent that way. Now the Advaitic position will be that we can make a distinction between pure consciousness and awareness. Awareness requires an object, so subject and object. There can't be a subject without an object. But when the object disappears, the subject doesn't disappear. Same thing we saw with the Brahman and Ishvara, right? That the Ishvara requires the universe. When the universe disappears, Ishvara doesn't disappear, it melts back into the Brahman. So they'll say that when the object disappears, then the subject, there's no longer a subject, because there's no longer subject-object distinction, but consciousness remains. So the ultimate proof of this for Vedanta will be samadhi. When we enter into that state of samadhi, there's no object of consciousness. Consciousness itself becomes its object. Or we can say that then we exist only as Brahman. Now, if we say that it's just an empty nothing state, there's no consciousness because there's no object of consciousness, then coming down from Brahman, there won't be any transformation. And there won't be any liberation that comes from it. And there won't be any bliss and joy. And we know that that's the result of this experience. So this will be their argument. These are all, this is what keeps philosophers busy. I had a professor, a philosophy professor, and somebody asked why all of the philosophers in India were sannyasis. And he said they had nothing else to do. what would they do? They had no families or anything. They became philosophers. So yeah, I think sometimes they thought too much. So, if it's the case that even consciousness requires an object for its existence, it follows that there can be no such thing as pure consciousness apart from difference. So this is the proof that this universe has to exist. Thus, on this account, if consciousness exists, it follows that difference and plurality exist as well. With his one thesis, and against the backdrop of Vedantic idealism, Ramanuja is able to generate one limb of his organismic cosmology. That means it's one organism. That he sees everything is fitting together. Actually, the philosophy of Ramanuja is much easier to understand and much more intuitive, because almost impossible for us to say I don't exist, the universe doesn't exist, that I'm really one with Brahman, that there's no difference between any of us. That is fantastic. And somehow we accept it on logical grounds, and we see that these, say with Sri Ramakrishna, when he'll go into these higher states, he'll be the proof of it. But in terms of just how much it contradicts our ordinary understanding of the world, it's fantastic, tremendous. In fact, the whole concept of Maya is that the truth of things is the exact opposite of what it seems to be. That Brahman alone is real. Brahman is the one thing that we have no idea if it's real. The universe is unreal, it's the one thing that we accept. That the individual is really one with Brahman. Beginning and the end of our life is I'm an individual. And we all feel that. So it's perfectly counterintuitive. Doesn't mean that it's wrong. But it goes against all of our natural inclinations and tendencies. When we examine the philosophy, there's brilliant philosophy, and if we look at consciousness, the way he explains it, it's very hard to refute that idea. Because consciousness is completely, utterly different from anything else we can think of. It can't be, from the materialistic point of view, no matter what these scientists will do, trying to show how DNA develops until it can create consciousness somehow. Nothing comes from something else that is not of the same nature. This is a very axiomatic point. Right? That we put the two things together, with the third thing that comes out will be reducible to the first two. We'll have to be able to find that. This chemical analysis and everything. We look at the it's endocrinology. We look at all of the hormones and things that are secreted by all of the organs. We look at an egg and a chicken. That you won't find anything in the egg, cellular things or chemical things that you don't find in the chicken. And yet, they want to say that the brain is the cause for consciousness. They have absolutely nothing in common. If we really understand consciousness as awareness, and not as some Shakti thing even, something completely different, of pure awareness. So the Shankaracharya's philosophy is very challenging, very tough. And Ramanuja has the advantage is that it allows for devotion, and that it's more in accordance with our common sense understanding of things. And which one we prefer is really a question of temperament. Because neither one can be ultimately proved. They're all just these vain attempts to try to explain something that we can't explain at all. Yeah, so with our Tattvamasi and all of these things, Ramanuja maintains that there's a way of showing the identity between the individual self and the Supreme Self, but this is in nature, so not this oneness. I was mentioning yesterday these two different ideas of oneness and identity, that we can have identical cars, we can have identical twins, there can be as many as we like. They'll be identical in every possible way, theoretically, except number. There'll be many of them. And the other idea of oneness doesn't allow for identity. Identity means there has to be plurality. So Ramanuja accepted this idea that each jiva is identical or potentially identical. And the different schools have different ways of explaining it. Expansion, they get rid of this sankosha, so they'll expand or they'll get purified or something. So if we think of, say, each drop of water will have its own toxins and chlorine and other things. If we can take each drop of water and purify it, so it's just H2O, right? Each one will be identical with the other. But there'll be many drops. So this is what happens in that state of perfection. We all become identical, and this Brahman is also the pure ocean of water. So it's identical in terms of its nature, but it's limited, it's discrete, separate.